Hi everyone, Calais Stockstill, my ALF Training, and this is Diane Barnard. Diane, how are you, registered nurse?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you.
So this is just our second training.
Yes.
We did one the other week, and we're going to be doing a lot more. So
Yes.
thank you for joining us, Diane.
You're welcome.
Today we're talking about, is it going to go there? LGBTQ, healthcare
Yes.
and long-term care challenges for the LGBTQ population. So I'll let you take off. This is your subject. You put together this whole presentation for us.
Okay, so, but you can man the.
I will. You tell me to click. Okay.
Okay. So our topic today is LGBTQ, healthcare and long-term care challenges of this population. And even though everyone in healthcare hopefully enters healthcare to give excellent care, there are some gaps in care for this population that I think are worthy of addressing, and that maybe we should start with what the LGBTQ stand for.
Sure. Yep.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and questioning. And they're all, the one thing that I think a healthcare person needs to understand is the vastness of this community. Just because we have this acronym of 5, they fall under the umbrella of the human race. So we have different races, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic statuses, different cultures, different religions. So they are as vast and diverse a community that you could possibly have. And so within all of that, we have all of the associated health problems of any type of community, as you know, as they age, normal aging considerations. But then there are unique considerations that pertain to this group. So in addition to providing excellent cardiac care and everything else that would happen to someone who ages or could be in long-term care or any type of health care, there's also things that we need to do as healthcare providers to provide better access to healthcare and just better care altogether.
Yep.
So that's what hopefully we'll address in this conversation today.
Yeah, and then bringing it back to long-term care, we're going to cover healthcare and then long-term care issues.
Yes, because I think that the demographics of the world and the United States are aging, and that I think that particularly the challenges of the aging, this population as it ages are more unique. I think that the access to healthcare for younger populations, it's just been more user-friendly for the younger group. More tolerance in the younger group, not always, but certainly more. But the elderly or the aging population, they're carrying with them a lot more discrimination, a lot more fear, a lot more challenges.
It wasn't as open and accepted when they were
Not
growing
at
up.
all.
Yeah.
And still really isn't. Unfortunately, with all the laws or whatever, it still really isn't. So I think we have to be very mindful of our own interactions with people, the possibility that they may not be transparent or trusting, and really open a space for them to be, so not only they can be who they really are, and that we can honor, respect that, and give them excellent health care, which is why we're here to do that.
Yeah.
So,
and it covers many different social and gender minorities.
Yes. So it is a social and age, race, we've talked about those things, and professions as well. I think that as a healthcare provider, one of the goals for this conversation is to expand our general awareness, because we do have biases, even though we think, well, we don't. We still really compartmentalize people into the way we think they should be. And so if you would see maybe somebody that it wasn't in your mindset, could be gay, transgendered, or whatever, that would be a surprise. And that initial reaction to you, even if you would recover, could be detrimental to your therapeutic relationship if you're like, you know, or confused in some way. So we have to really open up a space that we understand that it can be any age, race, socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, or profession. And as healthcare providers, so that's a challenge. and an opportunity. So yeah.
Okay.
So some of the commonalities of this population throughout the years, not so much maybe with the younger, I think we're doing a little bit better with the younger populations, but I think that generally they may not have a medical home, meaning that a lot of times, just because if we're talking about an aging population, they may not have been transparent or sought medical care or been able to tell the doctor about some things because it wasn't as open or accepting. Maybe went to Med Expresses instead of having a PCP because of that lack of trust. And society really hasn't earned the trust of certain populations historically over time. I think that that's fair to say. Because of the amount of social discrimination that the elderly or aging population faces, they may have never, quote, come out of the closet. So this is something that we may not know about, or some of their particular challenges or what they've experienced. And there are, I don't know if I've linked the healthypeople.gov,
We have it at the link to it at the end. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, so the price of stigma and discrimination, what is that? Everyone has certainly experienced that to some degree, but this population has really experienced social discrimination and stigma. And the price of that over years are things like psychiatric disorders, substance abuse disorders, suicide. This population is susceptible to domestic violence and abuse. They have personal safety issues, and the isolation, the secrets, not being accepted, having to live kind of a lie of a life that really takes its toll on mental and physical health. I don't believe that you can separate the mind from the body. Stress creates heart disease. So when you live something with anxiety your entire life, or fear of retribution, that certainly impacts your general well-being and health through the years. So that's something, healthypeople.gov, that's a really great study. They've done some research on this population, all populations, but this one as well. And that's something that they found out were common themes.
Oh, here, yeah,
I think I already did them.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know that's what you mean. Yeah, I broke it down. I just took your.
Okay, that's okay. So, so psychiatric disorders, things like depression and anxiety, anything that that challenges somebody's mental health and mental peace, according to the DSM-5, it could be a psychiatric disorder. So we're not talking about, we're usually talking, when we're talking psychiatric disorders, we're talking about inadequate coping, depression, anxiety, you know, things like isolation, long time distancing from people, that type of inadequate coping, and they don't have access, or maybe they can't be transparent with why things are happening, then they don't get access to the right care. They don't get access to timely care when they really need it. When people have, lots of times substance abuse is hand in glove with psychiatric disorders because they use it as they self-medicate with it. Not, this is just anybody with poor coping, poor support systems are more likely to use substance abuse as a way to self-medicate. And this population is no different, and they actually have a lot of stress because they are fragmented and disconnected from society sometimes because of people's discrimination. Mm. Suicide, that's not, I mean, our population is rife with people who are struggling, certainly right now as well, but this population is not immune to suicide. Anytime you are isolated from people, sometimes they've been rejected by their families, they don't have the protective factors of the support of maybe their church, their families, society in general, which makes them more prone to suicide. Victims of violence and abuse. Sometimes as a child, you could imagine, like through the years, we may be dealing our conversation today is ultimately about long-term care and caring for people at the toward the ends of their life. But there was a beginning of their life, and a lot of this stuff started when they were either rejected, bullied. We have to start the conversation, not continue the conversation and begin the conversation with the elderly population, but remember that it started when they were young. And a lot of times when people were different, families did not react well to that. And they sometimes were victims of violence and abuse by their own family members.
Mm-hmm.
That's something, people carry a trauma memory. And even though they're 73 years old, the memory of being rejected, abused, belittled as a child is part of the way they negotiate their world today.
And I think that they're more vulnerable, and maybe some of these things come to the surface a little bit more,
right,
with some erratic behavior or emotions that you have to factor these in.
Yeah, so trauma in today's society and healthcare, we're very well informed with trauma-informed care. We take all the right classes in the CEUs, but sometimes doing it on paper, we don't really do a self-review or analysis of the way we treat others or some of our own biases. So that's something I'm hoping at the end of this, something we say may resonate with somebody and they may change or alter their behavior to be more accepting when they did not think that they were not accepting before. I think that we all could upgrade ourselves a little bit in the way that we deal in a tolerant way with all populations, and particularly this one. So personality, safety issues,
personal safety.
Yes. So when I think of that, I think sometimes when people don't feel good about themselves, they don't do the things that they need to do to keep themselves safe. When they don't feel valuable, they don't value themselves, they may not do the things that perhaps
taking medications or
correct medications, routine checkups, gynecological care, STD treatment, anything like that.
Hygiene,
yeah. So in isolation, of course, anytime human beings are social animals, they like to interact. Obviously now in the middle of COVID, we know that we want connection. Could you imagine not being able to be who you really want to be for the majority of your life? And that's really how it was for a lot of the elderly population. They could never be. And there were some really good references to another link that you had where people were talking about, anonymous people were talking about their feelings of entering into the nursing home and having to share rooms with a same-sex male and having to feel like they had to go back in the closet. And that's really traumatizing for somebody, and really important for the healthcare provider to know.
Right.
You can be
aware of those. Isolation.
Yeah. So no, go ahead. We had just talked about feeling isolated by. Yeah. So I think that we kind of went over the healthcare considerations. These are some common, of course, they're under the human umbrella, so they're going to have everything. All of these could be in any population, obviously, but these are something that to be a good healthcare provider, we must consider them as a possibility. So domestic violence in same-sex couples, certainly that's an issue. Bullying for all ages. When we think about all the anti-bullying programs, we think about kids and we think about teenagers, but we don't think about adults, and we certainly don't think of older people, or maybe the other residents in a long-term care facility, how they may react to someone who is not the same as them. So that would still be just as painful of an issue for someone experiencing that in an elderly care facility as really a child. Maybe different, but still painful. STD and prevention is always an issue. Drug use is an issue in this population. Lack of medical home we talked about. Certainly trust issues in the elderly population. Most of them, some of them, maybe not most, but frequently they've not been able to be transparent with who they are. They have not lived openly as a gay or lesbian person or transgendered person. So entering into that relationship with you as a healthcare provider, they may not tell you that. So that's something that we have to think about as well. I always wanted to be able to create a space for someone to be whoever they are. And it doesn't happen right away, but you create that space by not being judgmental, being careful with the words you choose, and allowing that person to possibly believe that you're someone they could trust. But trust does not just come for this population.
Yeah, listening, good listener.
Yes, absolutely. And to learn how to be empathetic, therapeutic communication, and certainly being careful of the flippant words you speak, because there are always someone here like that could hear them. Body dysmorphic disorders, eating disorders, any type of control when they feel out of control, history of trauma and abuse, behavioral health issues, pre-exposure and post-exposure prophylaxis. I put that in there because that's just something that a healthcare provider needs to be aware of. That's for HIV, that's a whole PrEP. That's a whole type of treatment for pre-exposure or post-exposure prophylactic for HIV. And a lot of them aren't able to access that because if they're not being transparent or authentic, they may not be able to get the care they need. So that's something that I think that all of us need to be well versed in. The treatments, the access to healthcare, what they could be accessing, but they don't because they're not saying that they are. So we have to start the conversation or open a space for them to have the conversation so we can get them to the right care. And we also, I think that our community outreach and engaging the individual in care, there are so many people that don't have a medical home, and so they don't access the care that they need. And if we are going to improve care for this population, we have to do kind of a grassroots thing and make sure that we're out there and we are advocating for appropriate medical homes for this population. So you can click on to the next one. All right. So social determinants of health. So this would apply to anyone, any human being. Poverty, homelessness, housing, discrimination, minority stress, incarceration, and education. These are all social determinants of health. Obviously, for poverty, you may not have access to timely care. You may not have the money to get specialized care. If you're homeless on the street, you certainly don't have the access to care that somebody that goes to their PCP regularly, has all their vaccinations. Housing is an issue, discrimination, all of these. And you say, well, how does that apply? But if you think about somebody who was lesbian or gay or transgendered or whatever through the years, they could have risked losing their job. It may not be that way today, but we have to remember this population came through a different type of culture. They
may not get job promotions or.
Right. They may risk losing their home. They may be turned down for a loan. They're always one step away from, or they were at one point, or perceived they were one step away from losing everything. And that's a terrible burden and stress to bear in a lifetime. So they would be because of, we're talking to the older population, because of those risks, they may have been more likely to experience these social determinants of health, because when you don't have access to health care, you don't have access to health when you need it. So
maybe not good health insurance with a job.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So improving healthcare. So there's not a lot of data. I tried to research the data, and I mean, there is data on the amount, but I think that like with census and a lot of people they don't really graph that. So we don't have a lot of data on the proportion of people who identify with this group. So it would be hard to figure out, we really need help for this population. But we know that we need help. So I think that the data, probably the numbers are a little low on the amount of people because they're not answering that specific question in census or different types of, social inventories. But we need to improve the data to identify how many people are out there, what kind of healthcare are they accessing, what kind of care do they need in order to bring us as a healthcare system up to speed. I think that we have to prevent suicide prevention in the homeless, increase cultural competence for healthcare students, HIV prevention, obviously, anti-bullying program that continues through the years. You don't have to go, the world is very stressful, and I think you don't have to go very far before you see bullying. You can see somebody yelling at the McDonald's worker. You can see, like, we have a very abrupt society and a very impatient one. So I think that what we think as bullying as children really continues as adults. And we see it in our everyday life, but there's also that element where people are very mean to people that aren't like them. And so bullying absolutely continues as adults. And these people, this population, really are targets, unfortunately.
They always have been targets, right?
Always have been, and we need to do better as a society for everybody, but including, I think that we've made a lot of gains, but most of it is coming at a younger population, maybe the college population. We certainly have domestic partner rights now for some, insurance. We've done a lot. We have a long way to go. And of course, we always have to include trauma-informed care in all of our teaching for all of our populations.
Yeah.
Okay. So issues for, so we have, not only are we talking about people, we want to improve the experience of the individuals that are entering long-term care. We also want to make sure that the staff that are LGBTQ staff are protected, safe, and feel welcome in their work environment. And that is a challenging task because of the nature of the population. As they age, sometimes they lose their social filters. They're coming from different cultures, they're coming from different biases. And I think that, or I believe that it will be challenging for some staff because they may find themselves targets of some very unfriendly situations. So there's a couple things that long-term care agencies or healthcare agencies need to do. They need to make sure that all staff are trained in therapeutic communication and cultural competence, and they have to make sure that the staff have access to either like a work partner or somewhere to talk about, because the last thing that an individual wants to do is lose their employment because they got frustrated with someone who maybe has Alzheimer's or a related disorder. I mean, I used to work in long-term care, and there were so many nuns that cursed like sailors, and they probably never would have said that if they had have degenerative brain disease, but they did. And
you can't like correct
no
residents. You can't change that
No.
behavior. It's the way it is.
Right.
And I like your idea of having somebody that they can go to and maybe change shifts, put them with different, maybe
right.
if it's a problem, maybe you shouldn't be working with that particular resident.
I think so. And I think that though, I'm a big believer in psychological resiliency, and that I learned a long time ago when I first became a mental health nurse this lovely psychologist said, you know, whoever you are, whatever you think you are, or whatever you feel self-conscious about, you have to come to terms with that, because they're coming after you, and they're coming after you hard. So if you think you're heavy, you're going to be called every derogatory heavy term in the world, and it's going to burn you. And that you have to understand, and you have to either be comfortable with that, or find a way to understand that they're mentally ill, or their illness, or their pain hurt people, hurt other people. So I do think that when a great facility would try to implement some type of amazing support system within their staff, to help them understand, not to take it personally, to provide support, certainly if it turned into abuse, to manage that situation in a timely, fair, and authentic way. I think that people feel the population or the person that had been targeted, let's say a middle-aged woman who has been targeted her entire life, is a caregiver for someone. I think we've moved beyond the point where a resident of sound mind is abusive. I think that there has to be timely, relevant, and thoughtful management of that, whatever those leaders, the leadership of that community decide to do. I don't think it helps somebody to let them say, we just have to go back, just ignore them.
Right.
So I think they really we have to upgrade our ability to help the staff help others too.
I think that the employee would feel, like you said, they have no choice, and they're in some sort of a hostile environment.
Yeah, so and I think that this particular, like, hospitals can be hostile because people are in pain, they're frightened, they're scared. There's so many things that the patients themselves are, and so it is a delicate balance. But as a society, I believe that we really need to move toward advocating for the staff as well, because great facilities want to keep their great staff. And so, and they try to do that by providing support, teaching, teaching cultural competencies.
Right. And the one
to each
point
other.
I would make is that no matter what happens, don't respond, because it could be considered abuse on your part.
Correct.
So be very careful not to take it personally and get emotional, because even verbally saying something back to them could be considered elder abuse. Or
correct.
You got to be very careful.
And that is true, because when you sign on to work with someone who is elderly, then there is such a thing as elder abuse. That's a whole nother topic. But I think that the individual needs to know that there's support in the work environment and community, that they can go to the supervisor and say, hey, listen, I'm having a hard time. I'm going to finish this shift. I'm going to do it well. Can we talk about, and there has to be some receipt that leadership has to say, yeah, we need to talk about this. Because I believe that when people, I always learned as a nurse, when people feel heard, they begin to heal. And that would be a situation when you already feel denigrated or abused in some way. If somebody says, I'll just get back in there, you don't feel worse. But if somebody, even your peer, a working relationship, I see he's giving me a hard time, I'll take over here, why don't you take mine? Like, to show that support is such an amazing thing to do for anybody, and particularly somebody that may have experienced a lot of discrimination and abuse in the past. Yeah,
maybe if you have those issues, put together some policies and procedures and start to put it into your training and say, we have an issue, we need to address it, we need to make sure we put some procedures in place.
Right. And so the other thing is, like, they say words, sticks and stones but words really do hurt. And there's only so many things. And I do think that in some part, somebody with a lot of times in a dementia patient, and I'm not saying that everyone, there are age-related cognitive changes, and then there are certainly dementias, not all are Alzheimer's, there's a lot of different kinds. But most of the progressive, permanent, irreversible dementias, they not only have cognitive decline, they have personality changes as well. So a facility who's really looking out may educate their staff on these personality changes associated with a dementia diagnosis, such as the nun that cursed like a sailor. She didn't want to curse like a sailor. She spent her whole life not cursing like a sailor. The last thing she ever wanted to do was for people to be saying, who wants to go see the person in 109 who curses? That's not what anybody wants in their life. People want to live their life with integrity and honor right to the very end. Most people do. I've never met anyone that didn't. So I believe that everybody wants that. And certainly when you instruct your staff with the possibility that these people do, like these individuals that are being abusive to you, maybe some of them do want to be that way, but for the most part, if they have a dementia diagnosis, they really don't want to be.
They don't have control of that. Yeah.
Correct. But you do have control of your own behaviors. And that's where you would have the support of hopefully a really great place to work.
and you know, a really, depending, I mean, a lot of facilities wouldn't keep somebody that was a really difficult person. I mean, there are behavior facilities that take in harder residents, but I know that at our facility, if we had somebody that was, you know, potentially difficult to our staff, I'd be more concerned with losing my staff.
Yes.
It would be with, but I mean, there are facilities that deal in mental health and behavior related issues.
Right. And it's also an opportunity to be analytical. When somebody is difficult or aggressive or whatever, I always think of the patient. What does this patient need to make them have their best life possible? Because that's why we're in healthcare. And so if they are angry, yelling, screaming, demeaning, I mean, it might be something that could be helped with if they were cognitively able, like therapist, or perhaps a medication. If they were, there's always something that perhaps we could do, not to give them a medication because they offended you, but to give them a better life, to not to be so distressed or chaotic, or to be moved out of a place which might be fabulous for them.
Mm.
You always have to think about, as the professional, what could I be doing to improve this situation? As uncomfortable it is for me, what can I do? What does this patient need from me at this time? And hopefully be able to find a common ground with them.
Yeah, and in situations where there could be false complaints, you know, somebody saying,
yes,
you know, this person, so we need to be aware of those things as well. False complaints could be an issue.
Well, it ties into the culture. I mean, I think that maybe a man would not want a gay man taking care of him, even though, in that, I mean, that maybe, when I've been a nurse forever. So back in the day, when a man needed to have a catheter, there was an orderly that did it, and a woman would never do. But, you know, healthcare is so fast-paced and everything. Mm-hmm. It's totally normal. But still, that population is still alive that would have been aghast if a woman came in and did that. But we don't think of that. We need to be mindful of where not only our culture and our needs and our mental health needs, but those of our patients. Where are they coming from? What is their cultural norm? What is their religious affiliation? And try to build some tolerance on both sides. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're there to care for people. And the people, I kind of like to think the people that are placed in a place where they maybe don't want to be, like, they certainly, I have compassion because they probably want to be in their own house. And I often think of
they have no control, really.
Yes. And they had to give up, like they had to move everything that they owned. If they're in maybe a nursing home or whatever, they had to move everything they owned, get rid of everything to bring it down to one 10 by 10 room. maybe. And like, I think of that sometimes and I think, well, you know.
Maybe they can't express those feelings, and the only way they can do it is
Yes.
lashing out.
Frustration. And you have no idea where they came from. And they could possibly be this population too that is rejecting somebody. You just know.
And we're going to talk about that now from the resident's perspective.
Okay.
LGBTQ moving into long-term care, which is going to become more and more frequent. It has happened, but I think this population is more out in the public, and yeah, they're going to be dealing with these type of issues. Go ahead, Diane.
So for the elderly, like what I always remember is like where you are right here and where did you come from and what were your experiences getting here. And so we're like, well, you're here now, it's all good, but it really isn't good because remember, we carry those trauma memories, we carry like our biography becomes our biology in a way, and vice versa. And so this individual is coming into this situation, and like that example that you had shared with me.
Yeah, we're going to jump over to that.
Okay.
The examples after.
Okay. Can I get a drink of water really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
So people moving into a long-term care, into your facilities where you're going to be working, could be dealing with verbal or physical harassment from other residents. They could be refused admission or readmission, or attempted or abrupt discharge. They could face verbal or physical harassment from staff. Staff could refuse to accept medical power of attorney from resident's spouse or partner. They could restriction of visitors. These are some of the issues that they could be dealing with. Staff refuse to refer to transgender by their preferred name or pronoun, so that could be an issue. So if a transgender female wants to be called she, and the staff's refusing to call her a she. Staff refused to provide basic services or care, and staff denied medical treatment. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to jump over to the study that we found, which is really fantastic on this subject. Here's a list of the resources that we used for this particular training. And I'll have this in the resource section of the training as well. So let me share the, okay. Did you put the water by your,
Yes, thank you. And I was thinking that is a form of abuse, not filling somebody's water bottle.
That's right. Definitely would be considered neglect.
Yes.
So I'm sorry we neglected you. So this is a study put together by the, let's see, who is it from? I'll put a link to it in the resources section.
Is it the Arcus Foundation? No.
It's the LGBT long-term .org, yeah.
Okay.
So basically they did this study, and I'll just read a couple brief paragraphs here. Without traditional support systems in place, many LGBTQ elders end up relying on nursing homes or other institutions like assisted living, providing long-term care. Yet little information is available about the opinions and experiences of LGBTQ older adults in these settings. This report is the result of a survey undertaken by 6 organizations seeking to better understand the experiences of LGBTQ older adults in long-term care settings. So of the 769 individuals who completed the survey, 284 were identified as LGBTQ older adults, and then 485 were who identified themselves as family members or friends, social service providers, legal service providers, or simply other. The concerns included in this report are mostly expressed in comments from respondents. So let me just jump down to some of the issues. So fear of being out and vulnerable. the question was, do you feel that the LGBTQ older adult can be open with the staff of a nursing home or assisted living facility about their sexual orientation and or gender? When they asked whether LGBTQ adults, only 22% responded yes. So 22 respondents said yes, and 78% said not sure. So they don't feel like they can be comfortable being out. Here's a quote from one of the respondents, and I think, is this the one we talked? Within the next few weeks, I'll be going into an assisted living. Due to my financial situation, I will have to share a room with another man. The thought of going back into a closet is making me ill. Frankly, I'm afraid to tell anyone that I'm gay. And that's from an anonymous 73-year-old man from California. So that's something. Here's another one. I've not known anyone in a facility who has started their alternative sexual orientation, who has stated their alternative sexual orientation, which says a lot.
It does say a lot. It's actually really sad. I mean, I think about what we in healthcare struggle, or we think that we do, we struggle to provide. We want people not only to survive, but to thrive. And yet, just the fact that these statements exist, and I think that it's just not simply one place, and it's probably across the board, and it's probably underreported actually, that we, at the end of people's lives, people don't feel safe enough in anybody's space to tell them who they truly are. And I think that we need to be very assertive about improving that for people. And
yeah, I think that they spent their whole lives working toward this point of being accepted and, you know, being who they are, and maybe having to go into some sort of different environment that now they have to go back into hiding. I think that it may be their fear, it may be a reality, but
I think that people could have fears that aren't based on reality, but I think for this population, particularly of this age group, their fears are based on reality because of the massive discrimination. There have been people that, as their loved ones were dying, they weren't allowed in the
right, because of power.
They were an immediate family. They weren't allowed to have share insurances, or, you know, so it has changed for the better in some regards. And I think that there are pockets of our country that are very resistant to that. But I think that we need to, as healthcare providers, check ourselves at the door of every room that we walk through. We leave our baggage on the outside of that. And so we can be fully present, for the individual to be fully present with us. And if our religion, or if someone's religion doesn't particularly believe in, if they believe a certain way, they still need to check that at the door, because they're not there to judge, they're there to help. And we have to make sure somehow I think that we could pass legislation, but we really have to call each other out on our biases so we can create a more tolerant society, and that allows people to thrive, just not survive in our facilities. And we can do that by demanding an upgrade in everybody's interactions.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think that it's sad. It really does make me sad when I think.
Well, here, this story is sad. So 2 friends of mine, Vera and Zeta, had been together for 58 years. When Vera's Alzheimer's became too much, Zeta moved her to an assisted living facility. Zeta could barely trust family members or neighbors with the truth, let alone strangers, so she and Vera became sisters. Much later, after Vera's death, Zeta needed to move into an assisted living facility herself. She had many photos of the love of her life, but dared not display them in her new home. The other residents would talk about husbands, children, grandchildren, but she felt too vulnerable to tell the truth. Zeta was in hiding and terribly isolated. So,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I mean, residents always talk about their, oh, how many kids did you have? What, what was your husband's name? What, they make assumptions, and I think being aware as an employee and understanding this
I
particular.
do. I don't think you're going to change the residents, maybe, but the change has to start with the staff, at least. And I think that we have to demand that. We might not be able to change the residents themselves, but we can demand there to be an increase in tolerance, support, understanding, compassion in our staffs for the residents and for each other.
Yeah. So here's another one. My partner was in a nursing home for 10 years until she passed away. I visited several times a week. We have never mentioned our relationship, though I think everyone, except perhaps the direct care workers, figured it out. They do have a big picture of the two of us together hanging on the wall. So that was a story where they didn't feel like they could, be open about their relationship. But above it, let me preface. So some respondents developed an unspoken understanding with staff. So that's a better example. But he still felt he needed to keep it quiet.
And also I think that even if you're open, they might not ever want to be or choose to be with you. But that shouldn't stop you from, they might not ever have a conversation about their loved ones or feel comfortable or safe in your space, but they would have a conversation. I mean, you have to reach out, you have to start where you are. And you're not going to pull up a chair and plop down and say, tell me about your partner. They might not ever feel trusting enough to say, but you could say, hey, what are the things that you like to do? You could spend an extra minute of time with that individual. You could like maybe start a conversation about anything else to reduce the loneliness and isolation. You could say, hey, do you like puzzles? Like there's a puzzle group down. You could do anything, but the first thing that you have to do is recognize that for some reason this person is isolating, alone, or sad. Even if you guess it's because of that and they're not willing to say, that doesn't reduce your responsibility in trying to make their world bigger and brighter if you can.
Mm-hmm. So here's the, I thought this was interesting. So the survey, a total of 649 respondents. The number one fear, it was what issues do you feel as an LGBT older adult might face in an assisted living or long-term care? And the number one issue was discrimination by staff. That's their feeling. And number two is discrimination by other residents. So that was important.
I think it's important too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important because I don't think that if you would pull, like when I work with the kids and I do a poll, I have all these kids that are in there for being bullied. I always ask them, which one of you have bullied somebody? And nobody ever puts their hand up, not one. And I'm thinking, this is just statistically impossible.
Yeah.
But I just think that if you would take that entire concept and put it for any type of healthcare worker, if you said, are you discriminatory? Do you have behaviors that make they're unwelcoming and friendly? Or do you feel that people are trusting? I don't think many people would say, yes, I do. And that's where, I think more training, introspection, how can we get people to resonate and actually recognize that they themselves could be the person we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It's a difficult thing because I really don't think anyone in healthcare would say, yeah, I think that is me. Very few people. So that's a challenge for us to really be authentic enough to say, yeah, I do have a bias. I think I do. And I don't know how to create that, but that certainly is on my list of things to maybe and talk about.
I mean, you laugh at jokes when people say those things. I mean, there's
right. Right. And I think that even disparaging, like the things we say, the colloquialisms we use, are offensive. Like, I think we live in a society of snappy one answers, like kind of like we like snappy lines, all of our sitcom society. But some of these things really could be offensive to somebody, and we might walk away and really wound them and not know. That's a really good point. The words we choose count. They count a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of good scenarios here. I'll put a link in the course resources. Verbal and physical abuse by staff. So I think that's the gist of the training. I mean, it's to bring this subject to the forefront of your mind when you have a resident that moves in, or you have another coworker that starts, and maybe a part of the LGBTQ community. Any other final thoughts? I think that we're pretty close to our 1 hour mark.
Oh, okay. I really feel that I hope at the end of this, people open up a space in their mind to consider that they could improve their own personal practice, that they keep learning, that they recognize that it is an ongoing problem for individuals and certainly is present in long-term care, and to take their blinders off that there is discrimination probably happening right in front of them.
Yeah.
And that we can be a voice for change.
I think the one thing I'll say, and I think it's really important, because as a caregiver or direct care staff or nurse or whatever your role is, administrator, when we're just busy and sometimes we're just running between, issues, slow down, every once in a while, just slow down and listen to your residents. Just slow down, spend a few minutes. It doesn't have to be every day with this particular person, but get to know them. And I think it'll make a world of difference in their life.
I have one little story I remember, and it's just something that made me think about creating a pause, or like sometimes you're seed planters and you really don't know what will grow, but you should try to plant the seeds anyway. And I remember I was graduating from college and some girl walked up to me and said, "You're the reason I'm here today." And I'm like, "I don't even know who you are." I said, "I think you have the wrong person." And she said, "No, we lived in Scranton Hall, and every day at 8:05, you would round the corner and I'd keep my door open and you would smile and say hello and then bound down the steps." And I was like, "Really?" And she says, "I waited for that. I was so lonely. I just waited for you to say." And she says, and then as the first semester progressed and I made friends, but she said, "I just remember those beginning days just waiting for you." And I'd like to think that maybe somebody is waiting for all of us just to say hello.
Absolutely.
Difference.
Yeah. I think we should always, every training, we should just say that. Slow down.
Yes.
Spend a moment with a resident, quality time with a resident, and get to know them. And
also, it's an amazing opportunity. This individual, when they learn to trust you, you can learn from them. You will be better. Every person that you touch or you exchange information with, you learn. It's an opportunity to be better and maybe learn. And you may just have a friend, or like it may change you. Yeah. So opportunity for sure.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much, Diane. I'm gonna.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop our video now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for chatting.
Yeah.
Okay.